The year is 1976, and two young engineers are tinkering away in a garage in Los Altos, California. Wozniak, an HP engineer, is a tech wizard who dreams in circuits. Jobs is a charismatic college dropout with an obsession for design. Little did they know that together they are about to change the world forever. At the time, computers were far from what we know today. They were massive, expensive, and only used by businesses, universities, or the government. The idea of a personal computer compact enough to fit on your desk was starting to emerge, but most people were still dismissing it as a niche hobby for tech enthusiasts. Computers were seen as intimidating machines only experts could understand. The average person had no reason to own one, let alone know how to use it. After all, the chairman of IBM famously stated a few years earlier that there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. But Wozniak, the technical genius, was about to prove everybody wrong. He designed a computer that didn't need a room full of hardware to function and that could be easily used by regular people, not just trained specialists. Jobs, ever the visionary salesman, saw the potential and convinced Wozniak they could sell it. With no money for manufacturing, Jobs famously sold his Volkswagen microbus, and Wozniak parted ways with his HP 65 calculator. They barely managed to raise $1,000, enough to build Apple I, a bare circuit board computer that required users to supply their own keyboard and monitor. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They took it to the Homebrew Computer Club, a gathering place for Silicon Valley's earliest tech enthusiasts, and somehow managed to get a local computer store to order 50 units. All of a sudden, Apple was officially a legitimate business. The Apple I was a modest success, but Wozniak's next invention, the Apple II, was a real game changer. Released just 1 year later, Apple II was one of the first computers with a color display and came in a sleek plastic case rather than being just a pile of wires and circuit boards. More importantly, however, it wasn't just for hobbyists, it was a consumer product. With an amazing product to sell and a relentless pursuit of perfection, Jobs' aggressive marketing campaign made the Apple II a massive hit, selling millions of units. But despite its commercial success, Apple II was far from being the perfect product Jobs envisioned. However, as fate would have it, soon enough he was about to find inspiration at an unlikely place. In 1979, Jobs visited Xerox's Park Research Lab and saw something that blew his mind. A computer with a graphical user interface, complete with icons, windows, and something called a mouse. Xerox, despite inventing this technology, had no real interest in commercializing it. Jobs, on the other hand, immediately recognized its potential. He took the concept, refined it, and, after many iterations, Apple introduced Macintosh in 1984. The launch of the Macintosh is now legendary. Jobs, ever the showman, unveiled it in a dramatic presentation featuring the now famous 1984 Super Bowl commercial directed by none other than Ridley Scott. The ad painted Apple as the hero smashing the oppressive rule of IBM, positioning the Mac as the computer for rebels and creatives. The audience went wild. Say anything you want about Jobs, but he knew how to hype and sell his products. The Mac was the first widely available computer with a graphical interface, and it changed the industry forever. But while the Macintosh was revolutionary, internally, Apple was in turmoil. The development of the Mac had been filled with tension, as Jobs' perfectionism and abrasive leadership style led to frequent clashes with his colleagues. He was known for berating employees, rejecting ideas he didn't like, and pushing his team to near impossible deadlines. While some admired his vision and relentless drive for excellence, many found it demoralizing and exhausting. The launch of the Macintosh in 1984 was a pivotal moment, but despite its innovative design, sales didn't meet expectations. Priced at almost $2,500, which is equivalent to over $7,000 adjusted for inflation, the Mac was too expensive for most consumers. On top of that, it had limited software support and was underpowered compared to cheaper IBM PCs. At the same time, Jobs had been butting heads with Apple's CEO John Sculley, whom he had personally recruited from PepsiCo just 2 years earlier. Sculley, a seasoned executive, was focused on business stability and profitability, while Jobs was obsessed with pushing boundaries at any cost. Their conflicting leadership styles led to growing tension, and by 1985, the situation had reached a breaking point. The final blow came when Jobs attempted to oust Sculley by rallying Apple's board against him. However, the board sided with the CEO, believing Jobs' erratic behavior was a liability. In a dramatic turn of events, Jobs was stripped of all major responsibilities and effectively forced out of the company he co-founded. At just 30 years old, Jobs walked away from Apple, humiliated and uncertain about his future. But things would not stay like this for long. Over the next decade, while Apple struggled to find its footing, Jobs threw himself into building 2 new companies. Next was his attempt to create high-end computers for education and business, with futuristic software and a sleek, minimalist design. The first NeXT computer, released in 1988, was priced at around $6,500, which was like trying to sell a laptop for the price of a small car. Predictably, it didn't take off. Pixar, on the other hand, was a different kind of gamble. Jobs bought it from George Lucas for $5 million, not really knowing what to do with it at first. He tried selling high-end animation computers, but, much like NeXT, they were too expensive and no one wanted them. Just as it seemed like Pixar was another expensive failure, the company pivoted to making animated films. Teaming up with Disney, they released the first fully computer-animated movie ever in 1995. Toy Story was a massive hit, and suddenly, Jobs was back in the game. Meanwhile, Apple was a mess. Without Jobs, the company felt like it was speed-running a midlife crisis. They kept launching too many product lines, ranging from dozens of different Mac models to a clunky PDA called the Newton and even a printer division. All products were mediocre at best. For instance, the Newton message pad handwriting recognition was so awful that The Simpsons made fun of it in an episode where a character tries to write "Beat up Martin" and the Newton autocorrects it to "Eat up Martha." But where Apple really fell behind was on its operating system. Windows was getting better while Apple's software was aging fast. Macs were still expensive, but they no longer had the cool factor they once did. By the mid-90s, Apple had lost over $1 billion in valuation and its stock was in freefall. Things got so bad that Michael Dell, when asked what he would do if he were running Apple, famously said, "I'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders." Then, in a dramatic turn of events, desperate to save the company, Apple decided to buy NeXT for $429 million, mostly for its operating system, but also to get Steve back. At first, he was just brought in as an advisor, but within a year, he had completely taken over the company. The guy they kicked out was now running the show again, and he was on a mission. Jobs slashed product lines, simplified operations, and focused on innovation. Then, in 1998, Apple launched the iMac, an all-in-one computer that was unlike anything on the market. It was a hit, signaling Apple's return to relevance. In only 12 months under Jobs, Apple managed to achieve more than in the past 10 years combined. But this newfound success was just the beginning. Apple was about to really take off in the early 2000s. Jobs wasn't just focused on computers anymore. He wanted to change the way people interacted with technology itself. He believed that great products weren't just about powerful hardware, they had to be intuitive, beautifully designed, and seamlessly integrated into people's lives. And, in 2001, Apple launched a device that would do just that. The iPod featured a minimalist, iconic white design and an innovative scroll wheel, making navigation effortless. But the real game changer was its capacity to store thousands of songs. At a time when most people were still carrying around CD players and binders full of discs, this felt almost magical. But Jobs didn't just want to sell a gadget, he wanted to change how people listen to music. With the launch of the iTunes Store in 2003, Apple made it easy to buy, organize, and sing music with the iPod. Instead of pirating music or dealing with clunky software, people could legally buy songs for 99 cents and load them onto their iPod in seconds. It was simple, seamless, and it completely changed the industry. Then came 2007, a year that would change technology forever. Jobs took the stage at Macworld and, with his signature showmanship, uttered the now famous words, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." The iPhone was unlike anything before it. It had no physical keyboard, just a touch screen, an intuitive interface, and the ability to browse the web like a real computer. Other phone manufacturers laughed. Nokia, BlackBerry, and Microsoft executives dismissed it as a gimmick, claiming that people would never give up physical keyboards. Steve Ballmer, then CEO of Microsoft, literally burst out laughing at the idea of a $500 phone with no buttons, calling it the most expensive phone in the world, and predicting it would never take off. Well, as it turns out, everyone wanted one. The iPhone didn't just sell, it created an entirely new era of mobile computing. Within a few years, the smartphone industry had completely reshaped itself around Apple's vision, leaving many of its early critics in the dust. Nokia, once the king of mobile phones, faded into irrelevance. BlackBerry, whose physical keyboard was once seen as indispensable, became a relic of the past. And Microsoft launched Windows Phone. The launch of the App Store a year later only cemented Apple's dominance, creating an entirely new economy for developers. Then, in 2010, Apple did it again with the iPad, proving that tablets weren't just oversized phones, but a new category of computing. Each product Apple released under Jobs' leadership was meticulously designed, obsessively refined, and marketed like a cultural event. But, just as Apple reached new heights, tragedy struck. In 2011, after a long battle with cancer, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. It was the end of an era. Tim Cook took over as CEO, and many wondered if Apple could continue to innovate without Jobs' vision. More than a decade later, Apple remains one of the most influential companies in the world. Under Cook, Apple has expanded into services with Apple Music, iCloud, or Apple Pay, and pushed the boundaries of technology with products like the Apple Watch and AirPods. The company continues to refine the Mac and the iPhone, while also making bold bets on the future, like augmented reality and electric vehicles. From a garage in Los Altos to a trillion-dollar empire, Apple's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. It's a story of innovation, risk-taking, and relentless pursuit of perfection. Whether you love or hate their products, there's no denying that Apple has shaped the modern world like few companies ever have. If you enjoyed this deep dive into tech history, check out one of these videos next. Until next time, thanks for watching.